Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got a great show for you today. Nice to see you all here for Rising. Hi, Lindsay.
Hey, another Monday, another chance to hang out together. What's going on? How was your weekend?
My weekend was fine. Do you know what's on my mind?
What's on your mind?
The lanternflies.
Those are those gray, red, nasty
they're gray
looking.
And red.
Well, they're pretty looking.
Weird looking bug. Yeah, it's not the ugliest bug ever, but it's an invasive species suddenly taking over DC. I swear I'd never seen one of these things until about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And now I see them. They're in my area. They're in Navy Yard. Now I see them everywhere. I've heard people describe trees that just the tree is moving because they're just swarms of lanternflies in them. It's so
Ew.
gross and awful.
Well, I've seen them for a couple of weeks now, but mostly squashed all over the street. And I feel bad because, like you said, they're pretty, but when they come flying at you, it's pretty disgusting.
We have to kill
it's
them
like,
all.
bzz, bzz,
We have to kill them all. They all must die.
But that's actually a directive.
Yeah.
People say
They don't belong here.
They don't belong here. You got to get them out of here. Who are we blaming for bringing these things? I haven't done extensive research. You
I
don't
think
know?
the wind.
The wind. Okay.
The wind blew them
okay.
here wrongly.
We're blaming the wind. So is that what's on your radar or something else?
No, it is not. A little bit more serious subject, but maybe by the end of the week I'll be worked up enough on this to do a radar. But for now, something else.
Okay, what do you have?
All right, Vice President J.D. Vance and Senator Rand Paul are feuding over the Trump administration's decision to destroy a Venezuelan ship in the Caribbean, ostensibly because the ship was carrying illegal drugs. Now, let no one say that MAGA is a monoculture. Prominent conservative political figures and supporters of President Donald Trump's agenda are united against Democrats, the left, and the mainstream media, but they do frequently disagree amongst themselves on policy, particularly foreign policy. Now, this disagreement is healthy, and the more public it is, the better. I want to see my political leaders actively arguing with each other. It's democracy, it's free speech, and it's how good policy gets made. Liberals and mainstream commentators, well, they think it's embarrassing when Trump feuds with other people in public, like Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. But as an informed citizen, I'd rather witness the disagreement than have it take place behind closed doors. Disagreements are keeping the MAGA movement fresh and vital. They're a big reason that the current incarnation of the GOP has effectively outcompeted the Democrats, who are obsessed with gatekeeping and kicking anyone who dissents out of the coalition. But I digress. On to the substance of the debate. Now, last week, U.S. forces hit a Venezuelan drug ship alleged to be part of a Tren de Aragua drug smuggling ring. The boat was struck in open waters in the Caribbean, and 11 suspected cartel members were killed. According to Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the drugs were headed for some other South or Central American shore, perhaps Trinidad. Vice President J.D. Vance reacted positively to the news, writing on X, "Killing cartel members who poison our fellow citizens is the highest and best use of our military." Liberal X personality Brian Krasenstein replied, "Killing the citizens of another nation who are civilians without any due process is called a war crime," to which Vice President Vance responded, "I don't give a bleep what you call it." That reaction drew a strong rebuke from Senator Rand Paul, who wrote on X that it's, quote, "a despicable and thoughtless sentiment to glorify killing someone without a trial." Now look, I'm not going to tone police the vice president, and I agree that U.S. foreign policy should not generally be constrained by international law or also the laws of other countries. However, I do think Vance should care, and does care, about whether attacking and killing cartel members in the Caribbean is a good idea. I also want Vance and President Trump to keep in mind their promise to the American people and to their voters in particular that the U.S. would launch no new wars under Trump. It's a key promise and a vital component of the MAGA agenda. Here's what Trump said upon winning the 2024 presidential election.
But we had no wars. They said, he will start a war. I'm not going to start a war. I'm going to stop wars. But this is also a massive victory for democracy and for freedom. Together, we're going to unlock America's glorious destiny, and we're going to achieve the most incredible future for our people.
That was a winning message, but now we're changing the name of the Department of Defense to the Department of War. And worse, we're speculating openly about regime change in Venezuela. Okay, now, the Nicolas Maduro government is corrupt, it's authoritarian, it's socialist, and if it falls, good riddance. It's not the U.S.'s job, however, to arrange that outcome or to become complicit in whatever follows. Moreover, the U.S. has not declared war on Venezuela. The cartels are criminal associations, and we can disrupt their activities to the extent they are affecting U.S. citizens. But should we really go around wiping them out when they're involved in disputes that have nothing to do with us? Now, Trump still seems to be on solid ground here and is actually downplaying the idea of regime change in Venezuela currently, which is a good thing. It's a relief. He should stick to that. The administration should also back off some of this tough guy rhetoric. I know it's super base to call it the Department of War or to say I don't give a bleep in response to a legitimate question about constraints on government power, but come on. There's sounding like a tough guy, and then there's acting like a tough guy. It behooves our leaders to know the difference. What Rand Paul understands is that U.S. citizens are best served by a policy of not overly involving ourselves in the affairs of other countries. Further, drug smugglers would actually love if we prosecuted the drug war even more aggressively because it makes the demand for their drugs even higher. We can't bomb or kill our way to victory in the drug war. If we could, we would have won it 40 years ago. So while I'm not shedding any tears on behalf of dead cartel thugs, good riddance, it's nevertheless important to remain wary about the prospect of the U.S. becoming embroiled in yet another disastrous overseas intervention. Now, Vance had the right instincts on this when it came to the Houthis in Yemen, and he sounded a note of caution when other people in the administration wanted to strike them. This is a similar situation. In fact, it's more dubious since we struck the Houthis in response to them actually attacking us. As always, America first.
You said a lot of buts in there. America first, but Trump is changing his tune, and it's.
Well, I was mildly criticizing.
Well, and I appreciate that. But the thing is, you're saying that there's criticism from liberals saying you guys have, or not you guys, Republicans have some kind of divisiveness in their party, and it's embarrassing. I would say the fact that it's embarrassing is that Trump ran on being the anti-war president and wants to change the entire department to be called the Department of War. I would say that it's embarrassing that he wants to be the anti-war president, but entered into a war on behalf of Israel with Iran for 12 days that nobody really wanted, including Democrats. I would say that it's embarrassing that he put this counter-narcotics mission as a counter-terrorism mission just so that he can bomb a Venezuelan ship and kill people, and under international and domestic law that would be considered a war crime. And so I would say he's using all these words and terms to be more warlike when he ran on something totally different. So that would be the problem that would be more embarrassing than actual Republicans calling him out for it. I applaud Marjorie Taylor Greene, Rand Paul, anybody, Thomas Massey, who can say this is not what you ran on. I mean, Trump had three things that were pillars in his campaign. First was the economy. We know that. Second was immigration. He's going to solve that. And the third was staying out of the war that he called a disaster for Biden. I mean, and Biden didn't start them, but Afghanistan, he said, this was a disaster. I would never be involved in this. I'm anti-war. They call me the war president. You played the soundbite. So I think, President Trump is not living up to, or his administration is not living up to the things they said they were going to do in a variety of ways, including with immigration and people feeling like it's too harsh the way he's going about it, not just getting criminals out of the country. So I think, it's not about the disagreements within the party. It's about completely abandoning what you ran on and told the country you were going to accomplish and kind of changing tune while we're 9 months in. I think that is a fair criticism for people outside of the party to look in and say, wait, what's the strategy again? Or what are the pillars that you ran on that you're going to uplift for the next 4 years? Because if you think about it, this is still very early in his presidency. And we've already did too much warlike actions.
Yeah, this is an area of relative agreement between us. You were putting it a little bit more harshly than I think I did on my radar, but I think it shows the seduction of becoming involved in war as a guiding principle for the U.S. government, regardless of who's in charge. We seem inclined toward interventionism, despite a clear directive from the American people time and time again not to pursue these courses of action, and Trump being more rhetorically committed to restraint than most other presidents in my lifetime. Nevertheless, can be drawn into conflicts. So I would warn the administration to play back their own clips of them talking about this kind of stuff. If they rename the department and then don't do anything, fine. I don't care what it's called, but it's just okay, you're renaming the department, and we're kind of talking about regime change in Venezuela, and we did the Iran thing. This is sounding like the old neocon playbook to me.
Yes.
And I think they should keep that in mind. Listen to me more and listen to Rand Paul more. Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a perfectly adequate show for you today on this Tuesday morning, and we're going to get right to it.
Was it perfectly adequate when you got attacked by those bugs last night, or did that not happen? If you missed it yesterday, Robby's been seeing these, invasive lanternflies? Yes.
They're everywhere.
Did it happen again last night?
No. The perfectly adequate thing is a loving reference to my old co-host Ryan Grimm, who would kick off the show. He was most stern, no nonsense person.
More than you.
Yes, right. I'm Dr. Chuckles compared to him.
Okay, got it. Well, coming up on Rising, I'll be discussing how Congressman Thomas Massie may have an idea as to why those Epstein files are being guarded so closely.
Plus, the Trump administration has started its illegal immigration crackdown in the city of Chicago.
And there seems to be a divide among male Trump voters and female Harris voters on things like having children and focusing on your career. But first, Robby, what's on your radar?
Let's get to it. Well, the national mainstream media is finally paying some attention to the brutal murder of Iryna Zarutska, 23-year-old woman who escaped war-torn Ukraine only to be stabbed to death on public transportation in Charlotte, North Carolina last month. Now, the alleged killer, DeCarlos Brown, is a schizophrenic man who had been arrested 14 times, previously incarcerated for 5 years. The horrifying attack was captured on surveillance camera. Now, in the footage, Brown can be seen sitting behind Zarutska, and he stands up, and without warning or provocation, he stabs her repeatedly in the neck, killing her. The footage was shared widely on social media, where it drew significant interest, horror, and shock for many people, including many conservative commentators who see this incident as an example of the violent crime problem in predominantly blue cities. It's also an example of the media's double standard. There's no way around it. When Daniel Penny, a white former Marine, intervened on a subway train in New York City to stop a mentally ill black man, Jordan Neely, who was threatening commuters and had previously assaulted 3 women on the subway and accidentally killed him while restraining him in a chokehold, well, this became a major national news story. It was covered relentlessly by the media. It sparked widespread protesting among left-wing progressive activists. It was a big deal. Penny, by the way, was eventually acquitted of manslaughter. Many of his fellow passengers testified at his trial that Neely was threatening them, and they were relieved that Penny had the courage to act. Unfortunately, no one on the train with Iryna Zarutska could have prevented DeCarlos Brown from suddenly and without any warning viciously attacking and killing her. The ability to protect the public from DeCarlos Brown ended when he was released back onto the streets. More on that in a minute. Now, this murder took place more than 2 weeks ago and occasioned zero national news coverage at the time, even though it's a very similar, though completely reversed situation from the Daniel Penny case. But now conservatives are talking about it, and President Trump has weighed in, and the mainstream media has been cajoled into covering it. And you can guess exactly what they are saying. We are going with a textbook conservatives pounced framing, in which the story is not the story itself. The story is that conservative people care about the story. Cue Axios, which describes the story thus, quote, "The gruesome video of the fatal knife attack on Iryna Zarutska on a light rail car in Charlotte is drawing attention from MAGA influencers seeking to elevate the issue of violent urban crime and accuse mainstream media of undercovering shocking cases. Their headline, stabbing video fuels MAGA's crime message." The tone is one of feeling inconvenienced. It's so annoying that conservatives are pointing out that people have been murdered. Seriously. Here was CNN's Brian Stelter, focusing on what he finds vexing about the story.
I have to say, some of the replies to Musk, some of the comments around this story are baldly racist, stoking fear of African Americans because this man attacked a white woman. The open racism on sites like X today, it's eye-popping. But there are also legitimate questions about this so-called career criminal, someone who had been a repeat offender. And those questions, I hope they're not lost amid all of the cesspool kind of comments on social media.
Yeah, legitimate questions indeed. Now, I don't think random online trolls making racially offensive comments is the most important part of this story, so let's kick off that larger conversation on what went wrong here. Now, thankfully, local reporters Joe Bruno and Hunt Sains did some terrific reporting, actually interviewed the mother of the suspect. According to Bruno, Brown's mother is, quote, not making excuses for her son. She says what he did was atrocious, it was horrible, and it was wrong. The point of her speaking isn't to make her son out to be a victim. He's not. She says she just wanted to speak about the arrest to highlight how the system failed and things got to this point. So here's some relevant information from her, the mother. Brown was arrested 14 times for a variety of offenses and was sentenced to 5 years in prison for armed robbery. He served that time and then was released. Now, afterward, he returned home to live with his mother, who reports he was unstable and psychotic. She actually had him involuntarily committed, and he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. But after 2 weeks, the courts released him. She refused to let him return home. He became homeless. He began making crazy and erroneous calls to 911 and had subsequent interactions with the police in which they did attempt to get him to use mental health resources. Unfortunately, voluntary mental health treatments are not going to keep a determined psychotic person off the streets. Now, reacting to the murder, North Carolina Governor Josh Stein, a Democrat, writes on X, I am heartbroken for the family of Iryna Zarutska, who lost their loved one to this senseless act of violence, and I'm appalled by the footage of her murder. We need more cops on the beat to keep people safe. That's why my budget calls for more funding to hire more well-trained police officers. I call upon the legislature to pass my law enforcement recruitment and retention package to address vacancies in our state and local agencies so they can stop these horrific crimes and hold violent criminals accountable. Okay, but the problem here is not actually a lack of beat cops, unless when he says he wants to pay for more police, what he wants is more policing of who gets to use public transportation. Unsurprisingly, Brown was a fare evader. He had not paid to be on the train, and he'd not paid to be on the bus that he took to the train. So what this case really highlights, in my view, is the need for, unfortunately, coercive mental health options. And it breaks my libertarian heart to say it, but it's true. We need to keep dangerous, mentally ill people locked up. If not in prison, then at least in an institution where they can't hurt themselves and they can't hurt innocent bystanders. Let's get serious.
Look, I agree with you. This story should have been covered. I think it was horrific what happened. And I think when you think about somebody who has 14 previous offenses, some of them include like dangerous weapon use, robbery and other things, I was kind of just shocked that this can happen. I still do think that this is a local issue for local police, you know, the governor, the mayor to deal with. I think crime in urban areas is an issue, point blank. I don't think that I never said that it wasn't, but I do think that it requires, if it's going to use federal assistance, like let's say in Chicago, where we have a laser focus on, which is why I believe that, I can't speak for the Axios reporter, but why they probably try to connect the dots of highlighting crime. I mean, Republicans have largely been the party of law and order for decades, since Reagan pretty much. And that's what they quoted themselves as. So they're going to always push crime issues. So it is beneficial to make sure they're keeping hyper-focused on it. It's a winning issue for them. But this is not the time. I never like to play politics around somebody dying. You know, it's never the time to talk about that. I think there really is reform that's needed, whether it's cops. I mean, I grew up in New York, so whether it's cops in the subway, it matters. If there's fare hoppers, there's usually cops right at each station. They'll catch you. And then they'll see, but continuing to arrest this man who's psychotic, like you said, does not solve the root of the issue. So when you think about real meaningful change, to me, it requires local and federal government to come together. And what programs actually will help people that are repeat offenders and also have mental health issues to stay off the street? Because his mom didn't want him there.
Right, and she did what she did the responsible thing. My biggest pet peeve is when there's a mass shooter or a killer or something violent happens. We go, oh, why didn't anyone say anything? And then we find out that the family did say something, that they reported to law enforcement repeatedly. She had him committed for as long as she possibly could, but at some point a judge or a court said, this violent schizophrenic man who's been in prison and been arrested 14 times, who has schizophrenia, who has a history with weapons, this person, we're not going to keep them. Again, it doesn't have to be prison, but we're not going to keep them in an institution. That's crazy to me. We need to expect better from the coercive part of the system to actually keep dangerous people. I'm not saying it needs to be prison. It needs to be something other than the streets, because this is unsafe for people, for judges to decide that, oh yeah, this person, we'll just turn them loose again. If it's just mental health resources and there's no coercion part of it, it's not, these people can't help themselves in their this serious a mental health position. They can't just say, oh, I'm going to go decide to get better. They need to be kept somewhere, given antipsychotic medication, and then we'll see. But unless you're willing to do that, you're going to have more of these problems.
I think that the conversation should be more about solutions. So if there are libertarians, Republicans, or Democrats with real solutions, because we haven't found any to solve crime in major cities all over the country. Yeah. So if anybody has real solutions, and to me, federalizing cities is not, then I'm all ears. I think that's the number one thing we need to start
Rooms with
here.
padded walls. I mean, honestly,
put everyone.
Not everyone, but schizophrenic people. Yeah, I've said this before. I loved One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest as a kid. It was one of my favorite books. But I think it's had a damaging effect on how we view the institutionalization of mentally ill people. There are some violently mentally ill people who just need to be kept off our streets, or we don't have civilization at all, and we're going to have to be overly policed, and we don't want that either. Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another great show for you today. It is a wet and dreary day in the nation's capital, which I found out on my scooter trip in. I got soaked. I'm sitting here very wet.
I'm sorry that happened to you.
Wet and uncomfortable.
I know. That's really, it is. Look at you. They're showing the live shot of what it looks like. It really changes the vibe here, because even in the studio, we have so many windows that you guys can't see that, like, It's given calm
Darkness
and darkness.
descends.
Yeah. Well, coming up on Rising, I'll be discussing how CBS new ombudsman is a former Trump admin official. That's a giant red flag for me.
Plus, the UK is cracking down on a famous artist over his new mural and might force him to reveal his identity.
And Israel issued a strike aimed at Hamas officials while they're in Qatar. But first, Robby, what is on your radar?
Let's get to it. The main topic of conversation on social media continues to be the horrific killing of Iryna Zarutska, the Ukrainian woman who was murdered on a train in Charlotte, North Carolina last month. Now, we discussed the case on Rising yesterday, and we're going to get into some updates a bit later in the show. But right now, I just wanted to focus on one specific aspect of this, a common reaction that I've seen on social media, which was actually to criticize and condemn the other passengers on the train, the bystanders who did not intervene in time to help Zarutska. Now, we've already talked about the justifiable conservative outrage that this story did not merit mention by the national media, even though a one-off incident is frequently seized upon when it fits a liberal narrative. Think of all the attention the wrongful killing of George Floyd received from activists, from the Democratic Party, from the media. Think of the firestorm it caused. But this killing, which was no less horrifying than Floyd's death, and for being honest, arguably more horrifying given how utterly random and completely senseless it was, well, this is framed as an example of conservatives pouncing or seizing on a story that it's inconvenient for the left. Why on earth is this always the framing? Well, that's a question for a little bit later. As I said, right now I want to turn to a point I've seen many people make, including many conservatives make, and actually one I do not agree with. So Ben Shapiro, for instance, wrote this on X, 1 minute, 35 seconds. That is how long it was between Iryna Zarutska being stabbed in the neck by an evil and crazed psychopath and anyone doing anything. Many people stood by and looked apathetically at their phones. I understand why some commentators are looking to blame the bystanders because it's true. There was no one who immediately rushed to Zarutska's aid. But I think we're not putting what happened in context because of my own history. I'm always wary of these kinds of things. I first came to national media attention for debunking a viral video that appeared to show kids at the Lincoln Memorial harassing a Native American man. You know this is the Covington Catholic scandal. This video was selectively clipped and shot from a deceptive angle. This has taught me never to fully trust what we think we see on video. And indeed, it's important to remember that the viral surveillance footage of Zarutska's death is not what the bystanders saw. So I think it's important to go over what actually happened. And I'm not going to show the video, though you can go watch it online if you really want to. I'm going to describe what can be seen in that video. And if that's not something, by the way, you want to hear about, you should probably just skip the rest of this radar. Now, what happens is that DeCarlos Brown, the suspect, is sitting behind Zarutska, stands up, and without warning, stabs her repeatedly in the neck. He then walks away. Now, there are people sitting around Zarutska, but unfortunately her wounds are on the side of her neck that is facing away from the aisle. First, it seems that not even Zarutska actually understands how seriously, mortally wounded she is. But after just a few seconds, she begins to lose consciousness. She slumps to the side, and then this poor woman falls toward the window seat and then toward the floor. Now, there are a great many possible reasons why no one approached her for another minute. One, maybe no one had actually noticed that she was in distress. The blood was not obviously visible from the vantage point of the people behind her or on the other side of the aisle from her. Those people also might have been in shock. They might have been terrified of the knife-wielding crazy man if they were aware of what he had just done. Now, eventually, there's enough blood. It's terrible, but that's the situation. Enough blood for someone in front of Zarutska to take notice and then valiantly try to help her, even though by then it is too late. But even if assistance had come a full minute earlier, I don't know that it would have made a difference. Now, the reason I'm harping on this, that it's not the bystanders' fault, is that I'm very wary of attempts to shift blame onto bystanders. Let me be abundantly clear. The person who deserves blame is the perpetrator, and then also anyone who participated in a system that wrongfully allowed a violent, criminal, schizophrenic man to be out on the streets posing a danger to others. The relevant authorities would sure love for us to start pointing fingers at anybody but them. And this is a tendency, Lindsay, I see a lot. And why didn't more people do something, act? And we later learn, this is why I often don't trust the initial round of reporting. We later learn that people did try to help or did their best in a difficult, confused situation. I've not ever been proximate to anything as horrifying as this, but I've been on public transportation when something bad happens, again, nothing like this, and I have my headphones in, I'm playing video games, I don't notice. I find out about it later.
Yeah.
I've had a plane flight like that where there was an incident in the aisles and someone was taken off the plane by security the second we landed, and I had it happened right next to me, and I had no idea.
And you're right about that videotape that we keep seeing. It's a bird's eye view, right? The camera's
Right.
above. That's the view to see all things.
Right, we can see it, but
right,
they
that
can't
doesn't mean
see
that
it.
everyone can see it. But I saw your tweet yesterday or earlier today, and I was thinking a lot about it because I was initially like thinking the same thing as a lot of the people that were upset. Why didn't anybody do anything? Colin and I often talk about this. I mean, we don't take public transportation so often, but being from New York, it's just like ingrained in me where he might be like, let's just get an Uber or let's drive, because he's from Texas and that's my partner for people that don't know. But like, he's like, if I get on the train and something happens to you or we have a 4-year-old daughter, I'm going to do something. And if I see something else happening, I'm going to try to jump in. We saw something like this on a plane recently. Somebody was acting unruly and you see this bigger guy, and Colin's a bigger guy, like sit the guy down and say, stop. And so I think sometimes a male instinct would show that some, at least of the guys, might jump in and do something. And so that's my initial frustration. But I think that, sudden and unprovoked attacks can't really be planned out on how you would act. So it's easy to come from my purview sitting here in the seat and say, oh, I would have done something. Oh, this guy should have done something. Like there could have been fear happening. There could have been a misunderstanding of how much the perpetrator actually did, right? You think maybe he touched the girl and kept moving. But when people saw blood, you saw, which I'm assuming the guy in the olive shirt bend over and try to actually hold her wound. You saw people of all different races, which I noticed, run over and try to help her on that train. And so I also would, agree with you.
Right.
And
I
had to come
they
to that.
noticed it at all until, it's awful, until there was so much blood.
Right.
She didn't understand what had happened either. And that you see the look of confusion, and it's so horrifying. It's difficult even to talk about. And she's a little thing, and the way she falls is not into the aisle. I don't know, and I think it's very reckless to start pointing fingers and condemning people without even understanding. Maybe, yes, if someone fully aware of this woman bleeding out stepped over her and just ignored it, that would be absolutely awful.
Right.
And if that's what happened, then we can start condemning. But we got to be pretty clear that's what was going on. In the meantime, I think this is a way, again, of shifting blame away from what the only thing that would have stopped, even if everybody on that, it was a fully subway car, fully staffed, fully armed, police everywhere. That was sudden and quick. You are not going to stop that. The way to stop that was to have a person who is violent and schizophrenic, whose family members have repeatedly reported him to authorities, who has been in prison, who's had 14 prior arrests, encounters with police who try to get him mental health resources, but if you can't force him to take it, it's not going to do any good. That is where the failure is, and that's where if we're going to start looking for blame, that's where I want to go.
And I also think that on social media, unfortunately, the worst parts of humanity often
the piling on is so automatic.
But it automatically gets, it rises up into our timelines, right?
Yeah.
Something negative happens. Like there's so much good news. And I know that from being a local news reporter, right? Somebody does something like, even in Brooklyn, there were a group of 5 guys who lived in Brooklyn that used to stand outside of the train and walk any ladies home. Just make sure that they got to their apartments and come back to the train stop from, let's say, 10 p.m. to midnight. Just because people got off work late and escorted them, that never made national news. Why would it? Because we don't cover stuff like that. So I think like social media sometimes emphasizes the worst in humanity, and I still believe that see something, say something sometimes works. And also they're just good people that do jump in, and we see it often, and it will never make these headlines, but also it's not as egregious as this, so it's not something we talk about every single day. So I just don't want people to get misconstrued like we've just gone down this rabbit hole and write think pieces about how terrible Americans are. And I just don't think it's that way.
I completely agree. That's why I want to point this out, that we don't know all the facts yet, and we should be a little cautious about that form of condemnation. I agree with you. Good morning and welcome to Rising. Thank you so much for tuning in. We have a lot of news to get to today in the show. And before we do that, first, we certainly wanted to take a moment to take actually a live look at the memorials that are happening here in D.C. and in New York. You can see them on screen. That's the Pentagon on the bottom there, and then that's New York in the upper screens.
Now, today marks 24 years since September 11th, 2001. Nearly 3,000 people in New York, the Pentagon, and Shanksville, Pennsylvania were killed that day in attacks.
So you're seeing these memorial sites live there, as I said, today, as we remember, of course, those who lost their lives 24 years ago in 9/11. It's a really important thing always to reflect on that every year.
Yeah, and growing up in New York, I think we all can remember, or we're old enough to remember that moment. So in addition, it's been a tumultuous news cycle just in the last 24 hours. And so I know that you really wanted to talk about Charlie Kirk's life in your radar today. So why don't you start with that?
Yeah, thanks so much, Lindsay. Well, you've likely heard the horrifying news that we just alluded to. An assassin's bullet has struck down Charlie Kirk, the prominent conservative commentator and founder of Turning Point USA, while he was speaking at an event at Utah Valley University on Wednesday. Now, he was just 31 years old and leaves behind a wife and 2 young children. Graphic video footage of this killing, which occurred as Kirk addressed a large outdoor crowd of students and supporters. It shows him being shot in the neck. He was, of course, rushed to the hospital, but unfortunately did not recover. Now, this shocking tragedy has prompted an outpouring of lamentations from Kirk's many friends in conservative media and also in Republican politics. Announcing his death on Truth Social, President Donald Trump wrote that Kirk was great and even legendary. No one understood or had the heart of the youth in the United States of America better than Charlie, wrote Trump. Trump is right. Kirk's influence among right-leaning young people is difficult, frankly, to even translate into words. Kirk launched Turning Point USA in 2012 with financial backing from a Tea Party activist. The organization's stated goal was to foster a conservative movement on college campuses. Following in the footsteps of past groups such as Young Americans for Freedom, Charlie Kirk was adept at creating catchy slogans and useful talking points for conservative students to deploy against left-wing thinkers. He popularized the phrase, "socialism sucks," and added it to t-shirts, posters, and also banners. He took advantage of dramatically increased interest in crazy campus happenings among the broader American public, and he encouraged dissenting kids to challenge their liberal professors, form right-leaning organizations, and also invite Republican speakers to campus. Now, under Kirk's leadership, the group became the undisputed king of conservative campus activism, helping turn thousands of non-liberal students into fans of the Republican Party, and also its rising stars like Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, and of course, Donald Trump himself. Kirk, too, became a prominent star known for his debate me bro persona, but importantly, he did not confine himself to the company of the already converted. And he seemed to enjoy venturing into the fray and arguing with liberals and leftists. The more of them at once, the better. Take a look.
Do you think men can give birth?
I think that...
yes or no question?
I think that a person who is assigned male at birth, I don't think they can give
Assigned
birth.
male at birth, so people are not male at birth?
I think that a person...
See, your evidence that college is a scam, my friend.
So what do you say in some cases women with IUDs are murderers?
Of course not, they're not murderers.
So what's the difference between an IUD killing a conceived zygote and like a mother going to Planned Parenthood and killing the fetus in her womb?
That was actually the best point somebody made.
It's not about the cells.
No,
it's not about... No, I'm speaking. 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 No, I'm speaking.
That clip is very characteristic of Kirk. He had the strength in his convictions, but he had fun while carrying out those convictions. Now, at the time of his death, Kirk was actually scheduled to debate the leftist commentator Hassan Piker. Piker deplored Kirk's Kirk's killing and has warned against future violence, and I'm very happy to see him do that. Now, Charlie Kirk was also at the forefront of the conservative movement's conquest of independent alternative media spaces. He hosted his own podcast. He racked up millions of views and listeners and downloads on YouTube, Spotify, and other platforms where conservative media personalities have thrived. Now, while he is far from the only right-wing figure to take advantage of the changing media landscape, it would be hard to overstate his impact on the overall trajectory of the Republican Party, youth activism, and also conservative communications. The current crop of MAGA influencers on TikTok, on Instagram, on X, some of whom now regularly appear at White House press briefings, displacing more traditional media figures, they are the inheritors of the ecosystem that he built. The murder of an extremely influential political figure is usually an occasion for reckless commentary from all sides of the political spectrum. One MSNBC commentator odiously implied that Kirk brought this on himself by employing hateful rhetoric. And meanwhile, some right-wing figures clearly see his assassination as an opportunity to launch a broad assault against all sorts of political enemies. But it is during moments like this, when the temptation for ghoulish overreach is most appealing to political figures, that it's helpful to keep one thing in mind. In the U.S., political violence is blessedly rare. People do not generally kill one another because they disagree about politics. That is a good default status and one worth preserving. There would be no better way to honor Kirk's love of debate and discussion than to remind everyone that Americans should settle their differences with words, not with violence. And Lindsay will be talking, of course, later in the show about other reactions to his death, and then, of course, the ongoing manhunt to find his killer, who is still at large, which is very unnerving.
I was surprised that the killer was still at large. I think it's important to look at Charlie Kirk objectively and his life and what he was able to accomplish. We're talking about a 31-year-old, which is fairly young, should be young to most people. At 18, he really started this path, but then also he's partly or largely credited for the reason that Trump chose J.D. Vance as his running mate. So not only did he create his own ecosystem of political capital, he also was extremely influential in making decisions as the Republican Party, which is a conversation about how young people's voices can get heard. I mean, anybody who's able to galvanize that many people on college campuses and really, provide a voice. And then also, I love people that are able to get in the room and debate and be uncomfortable. Obviously, there's so many conversations going on around Charlie Kirk, but I think it's important to understand what he was able to accomplish separate from any feelings about it, and notice the doors that are open for people that maybe didn't align with the standard or the status quo, because there's a lot of people in politics now that are criticized because they're going along with how they go. But he even didn't want Ronna McDaniel at the RNC, and then she was gone. And so he's one of those people that, as you want a voice in politics and what's happening, built it from the ground up. And I think that that's something that people should look at as you continue to try to make change with your words and actions. That's something that he actively was trying to do, whether you disagree or agree with him.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. His achievements are just staggering. When he came onto the scene and started Turning Point USA, there were a number of right-leaning campus organizations, and he outcompeted the other ones. He built the default, the best conservative student organization. The events he put on were spectacular. So they introduced, he got people to show up. He got students all over the country to come to his events, to learn about what Republicans believe, what the MAGA movement is, as it was rising, as it was coming along, to learn about this Republican figure and this conservative figure. That was good for fostering students who were going to become good movement conservatives, good for fostering talent on the talent side of Republican speakers. They upped their game because you had to perform well at these kinds of events. And then, of course, the effect, as you're saying, on alternative media and finding different voices. And that is the thing I think he'll be most remembered for, and that people should really pay attention to him for, is his love of the fight, the with words, not with violence, with words, persuading people. He loved it. He so enjoyed going in there, being surrounded by people he disagreed with and arguing with them. And so many people, so many commentators, so many people of our kind of caliber just play it safe. We don't, because we disagree.
We argue.
And we mix it
up.
But
it's also historically extremely difficult to galvanize young people to get out to vote and to be civically engaged. That's just the bottom line. The history of our country shows that those are not the biggest voting bloc. Yeah. So the fact, and as I learned even more about what he was able to do with young people, I think that's something that even as commentators, Democrats, people within politics should look at and see, how do you galvanize a vote? Well, he was showing you how to do it on one side. So
he presided over a significant shift toward the right, toward Trump among Gen Z. That it really is to his credit that took place.